Have you ever wondered how the first coffee tasted back then, when it was first discovered? In the 16th century, explorers, merchants, botanists took to the West the knowledge of the existence of this drink that at that time it was considered almost as a very powerful and expensive medicine. Its fame spread from Africa, then the Middle East, and then to Europe. It was called the Black Gold, something never tasted before, and people wanted it a lot. With this video, we don't want to talk about that, the history of coffee. That will be for another episode of this series. We want to talk about the history of espresso, the evolution of these brewing methods, its taste, and why it happened in Italy. One of the first accounts of coffee in Europe is thanks to this man. His name is Prospero Alpino. A pretty cool name if you ask me. He was born here in Marostica. Prospero Alpino became one of the most important botanists of his time. Linnaeus himself, the father of modern taxonomy, the science of giving names to plants and animals, actually named this plant to remember Prospero Alpino. It's the year 1580. Knowledge of the human body and healing practices in Italy and Europe still lag behind Middle Eastern medicine. At that time, Venice was still a powerful merchant power, and he had diplomats all around Europe. Prospero gets a job as a physician for Giorgio Emo, the Venice consul in Cairo. He then travels to Egypt, where he spends 3 years and learns that coffee is a very popular drink there. He made one of the first drawings of the coffee plants ever, with one of the first descriptions of coffee in Italy and Europe. It's in Latin and it mostly goes something like that. As an alternative to wine, the Egyptians used a decoction based on toasted seeds of the ban plant. This drink is used to strengthen the stomach, to aid digestion and as a laxative. Prospero also offers a look at the places where coffee was consumed, also highlighting its social functions of, I guess, conversation starter? To talk about coffee, Prospero, in his book, used the word kahwa, which is probably the transcription of the Arabic word kawa, that was traditionally held to refer to a type of wine. During this period, the traditional way of brewing coffee was steeping the coffee grounds in hot water, which was a process that could take anywhere from 5 hours to half a day. Fast forward a few years, and Venice is one of the first ports to begin importing coffee into Europe. The thriving trade between Venice and North Africa, Egypt and the Middle East brought coffee to the Venetian port. From Venice, it was introduced to the rest of Europe. Coffee became more widely accepted after it was deemed a Christian beverage by Pope Clement VIII, the Coffee Pope. He was pressed by his advisor to denounce coffee as a Muslim drink. However, after trying it, the Pope allegedly said, "Why? This drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it." Other accounts say that the Pope blessed the being because he preferred it to other alcoholic beverages. The year often cited is 1600, but all of this might just be an amusing story. In Venice, coffee as an infusion was first sold as a remedy in pharmacies. It was super expensive and only rich people could afford it, but it doesn't take much for someone to smell the opportunity, and the first coffee houses are born. Again, these are places for wealthy merchants or members of the aristocracy. The most famous example of these places is still open today in Venice, and it's Café Florian, or Florian as we would pronounce it here. And here, finally, is where we witness the beginning of what we call Italian coffee today. Well, obviously it's not. What people drank in Venice at that time was very different from what we drink today. In fact, at the beginning of the 16th century, the coffee served in these Italian coffee houses was prepared and served using an infusion-based method, consistent with the prevailing practices across Europe. Still, places like this form an important part of the history of coffee. Take a look at this. For many coffee drinkers, espresso is coffee. It is the purest distillation of the coffee bean in the literal essence of a bean. The story of what we call Italian coffee today really starts in 1905 in Milan. Luigi Bezzera, an inventor, and Desiderio Pavoni, a businessman, put together a machine known as G Ideale, which is considered the first espresso machine to enter into commercial production. If Bezzera and Pavoni were the Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs of the espresso, the first espresso making machine was probably designed earlier by Angelo Moriondo, 20 years before them. It could quickly bulk brew coffee beans, speeding up the process process of making the drink. But there were never any Moriondo machines, and we don't have any picture of it, and this invention faded in history. After Moriondo, Bezzera and Pavoni instead sought to improve this process, and they created a machine that could shoot steam and water through a coffee cake under pressure of around 0.75 atmospheres, quickly brewing coffee directly into a single serving cup. Hence, in 45 seconds, an individual cup of coffee could now be prepared expressly for the customer on request. Quick note here, the espresso we drink today requires 9 atmospheres of pressure, 10 times more the machine of Bezzera and Pavoni, but more on that later. Before this machine, customers had to wait 5 minutes. 5 minutes for a cup of coffee to brew. We witness here at the birth of espresso, because a coffee could be prepared right away, but also because the water was pressed through the coffee itself. There is a famous 1922 poster designed by Leonetto Capiello promoting other coffee machine brands in a futurist artistic style that plays on the idea of the express train and the way that both the coffee machine and the locomotive were driven by steam. So yeah, this is it. This is the espresso we drink today. No, not yet. As we've seen before, it's about pressure. The coffee produced by these machines was very different from what we know today as Italian coffee or espresso. It lacked any of the crema that we now associate with espresso, and that was mainly due to the low pressures at which it was produced. Also, it was served significantly longer, as we can see from the cup size in Capiello's poster. Some people would say that it was probably closer to filter coffee than a contemporary espresso, but it was just much quicker to make, and that was not a small thing for Italian coffee bars at the turn of the century. Speaking of those, these machines were particularly well suited for the so-called American bars. Well, yeah, confusing, I know, but you see, traditionally in Italy, as in other European cafes, coffee was served by waiters to seated guests at a table. In the American bar, instead, the clientele stood, well, at the bar. In Italy, the first of these American bars is reputed to have been the Caffè Mannaresi, opened in Florence in 1898 and nicknamed Caffè dei Ritti by locals, or Caffè of those standing. The new espresso machine solved the problem here, facilitating this speedier service, and stood on the counter itself as also a piece of art. Despite their foreign origins, it's within these bars that a new Italian coffee consumption culture was born. It was developed with its own rules, weird rituals, built on the stand-up concept of the turn of the century. You see, in Italy, to combat rampant inflation, the authorities could, and sometimes still can, impose a maximum price for basic things like bread, tobacco, and yeah, a cup of coffee. Now, let's say you are in a very expensive place and you want to buy a coffee. Traditionally, in Italy, it has always been cheaper to buy it at the counter with minimum amount of service, because in this way, bar managers could have charged you more if the drink was served at a table. Therefore, the practice of drinking espresso standing was born. That was because customers saw no reason to pay more for a drink that was primarily taken as a digestive and consumed quickly. But the pace of coffee consumption per capita started to decline after the 20s, with the beginning of the fascist era in Italy, where the new fashion was autarky. At that time, the regime started to regard coffee as a luxury import, and domestic consumption was driven down in the 1930s. During the Second World War, real coffee disappeared. It was nowhere to be found in the Italian peninsula, and oddly enough, for a generation of young Italians, the first real coffee they tasted was from the American army after the liberation of the country in 1945. Regardless, the fascist regime thought it was also important to purge the Italian language from as many foreign words as possible. Therefore, the term barista made its appearance to substitute the foreign American term barman. And it's a Milanese barista, Achille Gaggia, that puts the last piece of the puzzle together. This last piece of the puzzle is the first modern steamless coffee machine. The machine forced water to flow over the coffee grounds at a super high pressure compared to whatever came before. A pressure of 9 atmospheres, which resulted in essential oils and colloids from the coffee to create a mousse, a crema on top of what came out of the machine, which was what we call today real Italian coffee. It was a revolution, and like all the revolution, it started slowly, silently, almost hidden in the shadows. No, it didn't. It's a smashing success. The bar in Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, this place, just in front of this place, installed one of the first gadget machines, and people were queuing outside to try what was renamed Caffè Crema to distinguish it from pre-existing espressos. The arrival of Caffè Crema is, for many, the creation of a distinctive Italian-style coffee, different from everything else, but also the birth of a mass Italian coffee culture, premised on the fact that coffee outside the home was very different from homemade coffee. Or was it?
Yes, it was. After the discovery of Caffè Crema, everybody was going to the bar to get good coffee. But at home, another revolution was brewing, boiling, but this is another story.
Most people cannot prepare espresso at home, and that is why the espresso-based beverages, the cappuccino, caffè latte and macchiatos of the world, triumphed over traditional preparation styles. Because consumers do not want to pay for beverages that they can prepare equally well at home. Then came the 80s, and the Italian coffee culture was spreading around the world, particularly in Seattle, where a small company with 6 stores was just beginning to sell espresso coffee. The role of Starbucks and other coffee companies in the US was huge. It was huge in discovering, developing and democratizing the new coffee shop format, with cappuccino, medium, large or grande, with baristas at the bar skillfully preparing you hot drinks. But it is also evident that much of the appeal of the espresso-based drinks is due to their Italian origins. But ironically, just as espresso has become an international icon of Italianness abroad, its most serious challenge will be to sustain the position at home, where, for my generation, it feels like it is something taken for granted.
And here from Caffè Greco, one of the most ancient coffee places here in Rome, we're done. This was the history of espresso in Italy. I hope you liked this video. If you did, leave us a like. If you want to add something, please write in the comments below. Otherwise, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. And what to say? Have a nice coffee, like me.
Che cosa?